Welcome everyone. Session 6, moving to fortnightly seems to be working, means we can get some work done in between, and hopefully we can keep up the momentum and it's more sustainable and we've got more time to chat in between. So thanks for joining us again. I'd like to acknowledge the Guringai people, the traditional owners of this land, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and future, and really welcome the current focus on addressing some of those systemic challenges we have. Before we jump into today, I'd love to ask you to throw us a little follow on your social media of your choice. Let me just get the chat up. Actually, so we can really keep the community. Oh, thanks, Yvette. So there's your LinkedIn and Twitter links there. If you could just chuck us a follow there, wherever you go. So we can spread the community and share the results of what we're doing here. I'm hoping that now we're getting to the really meaty discussions and some more action, we can start spreading it even further. So once that's done, last session, 2 weeks ago, we asked, does careers education have an image problem? And the clear answer was absolutely yes. I don't think there was anyone who thought there wasn't. And when we looked at it, and this is this kind of summary of the topics that came out of those breakout groups that we talked about, we asked 3 questions. One, if you ask people what does school careers education look like, what would they describe? And the things that came up were, it's basically inconsistent views. People would describe it in very different ways depending on the context. But predominantly it was outdated and old school, a bit optional, and for a sense that it's only for the lost kids. It's kind of a reactive rather than proactive, and for everybody as an essential skill for everybody. Pockets of it is vital, like one person here, one school thinks it's vital and key, and they were the pockets that we're trying to emulate. There was a real sense that there was a lack of understanding of people's roles, a lack of understanding of the value. It was competitive rather than collaborative, and I think that was more at the state level and product level, and there was a lack of sharing. That it was seen as separate to education, that other teachers beyond the careers faculty were reluctant to engage, whether it was due to confidence or time, or actually it's not what I'm rewarded for, so I'm not going to bother with it. So again, struggling to see that value of engaging. But the clear thing there was the pivotal point on those inconsistent views were that if school leadership seemed to understand and value it, then everything changed. So there were 2 kind of stakeholder groups that came out of that, the other teachers and the school leadership, and I think they kind of go together. The second question was, do people value, the value the role delivers, and what would you like the perception to be? And the themes that came out there when we looked at all the keywords were, we want it to be seen as more essential and central to everything to K-12 education. Seen as effective, so how can we prove the impact and value, and seen as high quality. There was a few comments came out that it was seen as, underqualified, or people did it when they weren't, when they were done teaching, and we've had a few conversations and comments since then that followed up that, which really reiterated that sense of like, and actually I had the same when I moved into careers education. A lot of people went, oh, you're going from a psychology background to careers education. Why? I think it's really important. Like, why do you not think this is really important work and really hard? So I think that, yeah, for me, there was a big perception issue as well. So when you put that 2 together, is the perception and the real value of what you do, is there a difference? The resounding answer was yes. So that's what we said, okay, how can we make that value more visible for this next session? And that's what we're going to dip into in this one. We're not going to have breakout rooms this week, but there will be 2 kind of big interaction things that we want to do, to collect some data ourselves here, and actually put into practice what we're talking about, making that value more visible. So we're going to actually produce something as a result of this session. When we were researching this and like, okay, what are the big questions we want to ask? It's not just a question of jump in and say, how do we, how do we share learnings, or more tactical ideas about making the value more visible internally. we went back and actually thought about the big question, and I think this is a really, when I was looking through the PISA data, it's a big question we have to ask, is there value? Like, do we know that what we're doing is valuable? And it's a scary question to ask. But I think if the residing perception is that it's not very valuable, is it just because it's always been done badly in the past or inconsistently? Do we know that it's value? What do you think, Jim?
One of the things that crossed my mind is teaching English valuable? So in other words, there's a sort of certain self-evidence about the whole thing, that our English teachers, and I don't know the answer to this, I'm sure people in the room will know, are they subject to the same demands for validation? Or is it just the case that through face value, English is seen as a worthwhile thing to do? Beyond teaching people at primary school some basics of literacy, are teachers adding any value in the same age group that careers people typically work, say, in English? So one way of doing a validation is to do a comparative one to other teaching activities in schools. And I think that's a provocation in a way. But I think sometimes we feel the need to justify ourselves, and we haven't really grown up. We've got this insecurity about our position within, say, the educational sector within schools, in a way that perhaps other disciplines don't. And it might be worth looking into that and exploring that to understand that better, to see whether or not we have got a bit of a cultural cringe.
Is it because it's not testable? It's not measured? Is it back to that whole, we don't measure it, there's no test for it, and therefore we don't know what success looks like?
Well, and how do they do that in English literature? Do they sort of, put the novels people have read on the scales and said they've read some meaty tomes in the last couple of years? In what way is that measured, and how's it linked to any kind of meaningful outcome in society? I don't think I've ever heard of anyone in a youth court in Australia uses mitigation that, please don't sentence him, Your Honour, he's read Wordsworth. But perhaps that has happened. I don't know. That's a provocation. I think in terms of how do we look at value, there's a whole range of different things here, and I think perceived value is incredibly important, and that links back into training. And I would like to think, for many of us, if we felt we might be suffering some ill health, and we had a choice between going to a faith healer or a doctor, I'd like to think most of us would probably choose to go to the doctor. And that's, in my view, is because the doctor has got more perceived value than the faith healer. And why is that? Well, I think it's probably because we know that the doctor has gone through a rigorous training, and she has been taught evidence-based practice and a scientific basis for what she's doing. And I think that's probably, if you start unpacking the reasons why people choose doctors over faith healers, generally speaking, it is because they know they're dealing with a highly skilled, highly trained practitioner. And you could actually break that down even further. And if you look at people who specialize in ailments of the back and spine, and there's huge variation in the levels of training that people have. And I can certainly tell you that I wouldn't let anyone near my spine who hadn't had an awful lot of training in an appropriate university setting. Other people might beg to differ. So that perceived value comes back to, and it comes back in so many different ways, to training. And we've made great strides in the last 20 years in getting a professional basis and getting a graduate certificate. And as some of you know, I'm involved in one of those, so there is a degree of self-interest here. But I'd also say, I argued at the time of the standards back in about 2004, 3-4, when we were putting them together, that the minimum standard should be a master's degree. And I do not, my view has not changed. In fact, if anything, it's solidified. That I think that a graduate certificate is great, but it's not in my view, sufficient. And that's
And
not
that
simply...
will have more people contributing to the evidence base.
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons why. I mean, I think we mentioned that evidence-based practice things in terms of medicine. That, you know, you like to think if a doctor says take these red pills, they'll be able to turn around and say, you know, we know that these things are unlikely to harm you, and if they do, these are the known side effects in trials and so forth. We've all been watching eagerly the way that the COVID sort of drugs are all being put through this rigorous process in a very speeded up fashion. So, you know, we're going to have much more confidence in taking the medicine from the doctor if we know it's been through a rigorous process of trials, rather than the quack who says, well, I fed it to my horse and the horse hasn't died. Why don't you try it and see what happens? So I think that having that level of evidence-based knowledge is really important. And I think the second part of this is a kind of a subtle aspect to all of this, is as a discipline, we are so practice focused. The pressure is so much, and most of you in the room are practitioners who are wanting all the time, quite reasonably, to take away things that you can apply straight away in your practice to improve your practice. That's good professionalism. That's pragmatic. It's sensible. It's completely understandable. But when that's magnified up through all of the conferences, through everything else, and all of the training is focused towards producing practitioners, there is this massive gap in terms of our research and our knowledge. And there's only a few of us, like Trent and myself and Peter McElveen and his team in Queensland, and Mary McMahon before she retired. There aren't many of us in the country. You can almost name them on the sort of, you know, fingers of both hands, who are actively researching career development. So we've got this tiny group compared to psychology, or compared to sociology, or compared to
education.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got this absolutely minuscule evidence base. And then to make matters worse, because we've got this quite compact, practically orientated minimum qualification, we're not actually teaching newcomers how to appreciate and read research or conduct research. They're not taught research methods. It's no point me saying, go and pick up Career Development Quarterly or the Journal of Vocational Behaviour, and then suddenly you're confronted by path analysis, structural equation modelling, analysis of variance, linear regression. And, you know, I'm probably lost half the room already. They're rolling their eyes thinking, oh my God. You know, this stuff is tricky. But the point is, if you don't understand that, you can't critically evaluate the studies. Myself and Liv had a conversation earlier today, and she quoted a study, and I'm not going to name it, but let me just say there was a study put out some time ago, which got a front page coverage in the media. And I believe one of the authors of that study was subsequently invited to give a keynote at a conference. I read this paper. It was completely flawed. And the research and the conclusions did not follow from their data. And I could see that just from the analysis that they had done. And I actually wrote to the author of this, who's quite an eminent person, not within the career development field. Most of you wouldn't know this person, so I'm not alluding to anybody. And I'm still waiting for an answer years later. And I went through point by point in a very constructive way, not in a negative way, asking questions about how they thought they could draw this conclusion. Is there further data? Was there space problems that you couldn't put this in? Which was a very polite way of saying what you've written is absolute nonsense. That stuff is still being quoted and used in policy. And that's the problem that we have in career development, is we don't have a sophistication in terms of appreciating and interpreting the research. We don't have a big enough research base to collect data on the effectiveness of what we're doing, or to innovate and produce new approaches. So we end up just doing the same old, usually depending on imported models from America from the 1950s, or the odd sort of bit of British research, typically. And that's about the extent of it. And that is a really bad position. And that position has not improved in the last 25 years that I've been associated with it, unfortunately. And there's only so many PhD students that I personally can supervise, or Peter McElveen can supervise, or Mary McMahon can supervise. You know, there just isn't that basis. So I think that is a real problem. I think that, you know, if we want to be taken really seriously, and if we want to get to a status, and I think we should be wanting to get to a status equivalent of a school psychologist, for instance, or counsellor, we need to have that level of research base, and we need to have people trained up to a much higher level. And I think that is important, because otherwise we're going to be spending all of our time simply serving our clients, our customers, our students, not reflecting critically on what we're doing, not developing new knowledge, not developing new ideas. And before we know it, we're way out of date, and also a bit fearful of any evaluation, because we kind of know what we're using is kind of a bit old and not there. I do not wish to offend anyone's practice or anyone's individual innovation. And what I see around the place all the time is brilliant examples of local innovation with motivated and engaged careers advisors in schools, basically having to make it up for themselves because there's nothing out there. And we don't capture that stuff. We don't publish it. There's no reward for the careers advisors to publish it. There's no career path that follows from that. So there's a whole bunch of structural issues there, which are maybe a longer term, but I think are really important. And unless we address them, we'll be having this conversation again in 20 years' time.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'd love to hear everyone else's thoughts. I mean, it is confronting, and I think that was one of the big questions I was thinking about when we were talking about this session. Like, we could easily go, here's a great idea, let's make that visible, and here's another idea. But unless we have that, there's a clear profile and perception issue that might take bigger things to shift. And you look at the work that Evidence for Learning are doing out of social ventures and trying to build this education evidence base and an institute, because I think education in general feels like they're lagging behind medicine, but it's just as important to have a really robust research base. And I think we have to make sure that careers goes along with that and can tag along. Whether the National Careers Institute is going to help with that, I don't know. But I think, well, let's recognize that there are some big system issues that we need to address, but not get depressed about it, because I know, like, just as you said, there's pockets of brilliance that we can make value visible right now. But do put your thoughts in the chat if you totally disagree, agree, whatever you think. It's supposed to be a provocative conversation, not depressing. But when I was looking at, like, okay, what's our biggest source of truth about data and impact? And the biggest volume study we've obviously got at the moment is the PISA data. And I know that Pat O'Reilly last week said there's a big study coming out of New South Wales. And I don't know whether anyone's had a chance to look at that yet, or whether they've actually released it, which will be, that would be good local data, which will be interesting. But when I was looking at the PISA data, that doesn't make great reading either. So just really briefly, before we get onto the positive, optimistic things, when we look at people's participation in career activities and the relationship to their motivation to work hard at school. So if you look at, okay, I did an internship, you say, I spoke to a careers advisor at my school, it has the biggest impact on them being motivated, rather than internship, attended job shadowing, or visited a job fair. So you could say, actually, that's the really valuable activity here. That's what's that's what's driving the most engagement with and relevance to the rest of the work at school. So let's say that's a positive, and you go like, well, why are the others not so positive? Why are they not making those connections? And again, I think it's really hard with this data, because there's so many inconsistencies in practice and delivery that it's really hard to go, internships don't work. We don't know whether they were relevant to the person, whether there was reflection afterwards, whether there was counselling to go with it. But I think it's interesting to look at our benchmark of what we've got. When we look at whether you took part in careers activities and misalignment of expectations, and when they say misalignment of expectations, they're talking about aspiring to something, but don't have plans to achieve the study or results that will take them there. So aspirations are too high for what they're going to achieve or planning to achieve. And if we look at just on that left figure 6.2, high performers, when they participated in an activity, did their misalignment decrease? And absolutely no. So the significant ones are the ones with the stars next to them. And actually we see that their misalignment is higher if they did an internship, if they spoke to a careers advisor outside of school, if they, so all of those things that you would expect to be really positive, whereas actually the misalignment was better if it was self-research. So they were getting more realistic information from the internet and questionnaires than they were from an internship or a careers advisor. Again, that's not, it's probably a more reflection on practice rather than an inconsistency rather than anything else. And then it's similar for disadvantaged high performers, so we won't dwell on that as well. And then this one is really interesting, the concentration of occupational expectations. Now it looks like there's not a huge amount of difference between the dark teal participate in the activity and the grey didn't participate. But they actually, look at all the stars, they're all significant apart from this one here. So this is, did their narrowness, did they get broader? So the further to the left is the broader their aspirations. And actually, again, research didn't make them broader, it made them more concentrated on the internet. But actually speaking to a careers advisor and doing an internship, which you might think would focus them in, has actually created more broad aspirations. So it doesn't seem to be a lot of sense or consistency. And my guess would be that at this point, this data is so broad that we're not seeing the truth. It's 600,000 across 41 countries, so it's kind of hiding the patterns. And I think local data that's similar to this, but where we can actually go, that classification of practice, like that was a careers advisor who did this, 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 or an internship that was driven by themselves and had reflection at the end of it, would actually give us much better data around this. So I thought it was just worth sharing that we don't have great data. We haven't got something that we can rely on easily, like we've talked about in previous sessions, to take to the exec as a nicely packaged, here we go, here's why this is so important. It comes back down to us. Until those system issues are fixed, we need to create our own value and our own data. So let me just look at the chat. Jim, do you want to, you've obviously been reading them, do you want to jump into those questions?
There's a couple, I mean, Matt raises a good point about the benefit of longitudinal studies. I mean, kind of in responding to that, Jeffrey also raised a really good question about what are the suitable metrics to serve as evidence of values of careers ed. And he talks about in higher education, universities and so forth, graduate employment data 6 months post-graduation to assess the health of the system is typically what is used. And I do think that really does set up an important question for us. Remember last time we talked about this hopelessly vague definition we've got of career as a sort of the series of paid and unpaid roles one assumes throughout one's life. Well, if that's what we're supposed to be helping improve people with, presumably the outcome studies should be delivered by whichever priest or celebrant dispatches us to the next world. When our lives are over, we can then evaluate the effectiveness of the careers advisor if we really have had this lifelong effect. In other words, we make these really big claims about how important this stuff is, but then we measure it in rather pathetic ways, like sort of, the first job they've got out of school, or the transition from school to college, or, politicians typically love the, some of you who've done my training will have seen me using the Neville Chamberlain video, what I made some years ago. Politicians love the idea every student has got a school to work transition plan. Nobody leaves without a plan. And that is the how you measure career development, which is just an invitation for tick and flick if I've ever seen one. Absolute superficial nonsense.
Actually, it'd be really good here to do a quick interactive bit, because I think we'll be able to capture some really good data. If we talk about the different stakeholders and just in a really short, like 1 word or 2 words, what would success be if we asked this stakeholder? So you might say, okay, if we asked a parent what success would be, what would their metric be? And just stick your initial thoughts in the chat. Don't think about it too much. For parents, I think that's probably a hard one because everyone says, I want my child to be happy, but then there's all the caveats underneath. But Maybe we start with school exec. What would a school exec's definition of success be? What would the key metric be for them? Because I think in the past, I've seen schools promote, X% of our students go to uni, or alumni they can use for marketing. I'm not too cynical at all. I think that's absolutely right.
I think while people are putting things in chat, I'll throw some provocations out there. If I was a school exec and I was doing my job properly, I would want whatever measures encourage existing parents to send further children to the school and encourage other people in the local area to send people to the school. In other words, whatever's going to bring the punters through the door. That's my job.
Yeah.
As a school exec, surely, because these things are businesses.
Yeah, I think we've got a few of that. Yeah. And what about other teachers? What do they want careers education to deliver for them? I mean, we talked last time about, is it people keen on their school subject? What do other teachers want from the careers education department?
Other teachers, what other teachers expect from careers advisors?
Yeah.
Well, it's obvious, a free period.
To fix what they can't. Talk us through that, Bianca.
Oh, I have the odd examples where teachers will refer students to me when the student gets too hard, whether it's from a motivation perspective or no, there's no way they can do that level of maths next year. So sort them out with some options as opposed to, well, how could we help them do the maths?
Okay.
Yeah, so that was what I was saying a fortnight ago, that's the careers services government cottage, isn't it?
Yeah.
There as the remedial service.
Yeah, yeah.
And want to hear about students to pursue something with realistic, so get rid of that misalignment. Yeah, I think that's a really good one from other teachers. And what about students? If we were going to look at student metrics, I mean, obviously it's very individual, but what could we use? What would students say is their success for most of your students?
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what people say here, because like being removed from the daily interactions with students, my guess would be that they want an answer, but maybe I'm wrong with that. Almost like they want to be told or be validated in terms of their path, or be told what path to go on. But I don't know. That'd be an interesting one to hear.
A job they love. So yeah, pushing the passion, and it won't feel like work. If you love your job, and be Steve Jobs. And then the final question, while you're finishing those off, is what in your day-to-day role, if you are in the careers lead role, what are you judged on? Is it everyone having a plan? What is the key metric?
I remember more than several careers advisors saying to me when I was doing a lot of training of careers advisors around the country, that they were judged on the fact that they were allowed to go in and out of school, which caused tremendous resentment amongst their colleagues.
Oh, judged in a judgy way, not in a
evaluation. In other words, they were basically seen as slacking off because they were able to go off and do a bit of shopping at Woolies in the middle of the day, because they were seen leaving campus, which obviously they weren't allowed to do. So it was this kind of resentment that these people were allowed out.
So there doesn't seem to be lots of any hard stats coming through as what people are evaluated on in terms of everyone having them. I've heard before, university offers, yes, from better institutions. Yeah, that's what I've seen quite a lot of. So it gets really hard for us if we look at that. It's like, how do we determine value? And, you know, if we were being really like lofty about it, yes, and we had all the benefits of longitudinal studies, it'd be fantastic to have great, robust studies that proved that we intervene and create better impact for a fulfilling life over the long term, and that the individual was better, that society was better, and all of that. So, but we don't have that right now. But I think it's really worth capturing from this group, and it's, you know, there's not a lot of data around and viewpoints, so we'll do that, and I'll package that up.
I was thinking. I mean, one of the things I've been saying for years and has got nowhere is that we actually need to have an academic study of careers, not simply a practical discipline. So in other words, there should be an undergraduate degree in careers, right? And studying what it means. And one of my definitions of career development is we're not there to find the ideal job. We're not there to just give people information. We're there to help people make better decisions throughout their lives, right? Now, if you start from that point of view, you could actually examine that with kids. You could give kids an exam where they have to make decisions before they go through any career education, and you could give them a similar exam at the end. And you could show progress. You could show that they've actually improved their decision making. They're able to take into account more factors. They're able to weigh things up, evaluate sources of evidence. You could actually make it kind of academic in that way and measure that. So rather than trying to say, you know, we ended up you know, every year we get 30% of our cohort into medical school, that kind of stuff. You could actually measure it in terms of people's ability, in the same way you can say they can do algebra or they can do basic arithmetic. Show
your workings.
There's a study of decision making. I mean, there's no, I think we said this a few weeks ago, no, as far as I can see, it's not common for schools to explicitly teach decision making in any part of the curriculum. And if there's anywhere where it fits, it's got to be in career development. I mean, that's what it's about, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. I think that's a good idea.
It's not my idea, by the way. HP Gillette.
I've got it. I put your initials next to it. Yeah. So, having talked about all of that, and we know what's different, but I think what we've uncovered in the last few weeks is that are absolutely brilliant bits and initiatives happening that are raising the bar, and we can, if we share those and make them more visible, then we can raise the bar for everyone. So the people who don't have that support of the exec or aren't in an environment, we can actually come together and help raise the profile for everyone. So there's a couple of examples that I wanted to pull out today, and then we're going to get everybody to collaborate on something. So the first one, Bianca, I think the day after the last session, you were kind of all over the SMH with the story published. And in terms of making the value visible, that was super high profile. And you tell us a bit about how the story came about, what were the key points, and what has the impact been among your stakeholders since that was published?
Okay, well, there was a little bit of luck involved with how the story came about. It was a random request from Independent Schools Victoria, who actually the start of the email was, I don't even know if I'm sending this to the right person, because we don't keep a database of who the career practitioners are in schools. So it was a miracle it kind of landed in my inbox. But the SMH was asking for content from the ISV, so the ISV was passing that on to schools. And what they were initially asking for was a Q&A piece from principals as to how and why they got into teaching. And so this was the example they gave. We're looking for something similar to this, or perhaps your career advisor could write an advice column. So I'm fortunate that I have a very engaged marketing team at my school, and they promote the Student Futures program whenever they can. They see that it gives our school a point of difference. So I guess I was comfortable in knowing I had permission to reply to this, and I did let the marketing team know and said, what do you think? Are you okay? Don't even know if it will get published, but how about I put a few words together and away we go. So I submitted it. not knowing it would be published, but of course it was, just after our last session. I think in terms of what made it newsworthy, it was a bit of an opinion piece, but it was also a bit of a showcasing what our program at the school is, which I hear from other communities is a little bit different. I don't think there's anything particularly amazing about it. For me, it's kind of benchmark stuff that should be happening across the board, but as we know, there are inconsistencies in what's being delivered out there. And certainly what I talked about in the article was things that really resonate with parents and communities, and it's what I believe all schools should be offering, really. So in particular with relation to strong links to industry and giving students exposure to that early to help them with their decision making. That probably a key line which the CDAA actually called out when they shared the article was around students having individual access to an accredited career counsellor really as often as they need to. It's not just a one meeting event that might happen in year 10 and might happen again in year 12, that a trusted relationship is really necessary for the career development process to be effective for students. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and what's the impact been? Have people got it in school? Is there, I mean, you had quite a good supportive network anyway within that environment. Has there been any shift?
Not so much within my school community, but I guess the response I got that really surprised me was from fellow practitioners. In terms of the positive response to that, I guess when you put your opinion out there, you never quite know if you're going alone with that or whether people agree with you. So it was nice to see people agree with me. So I hope it rattles the cage a little around what what is now expected, and particularly from parents from other schools. That's probably where I've had the biggest response. Lots of private messages around, oh, I'm not getting this at my school. So, what do I do about that? Which is scary and upsetting, but, again, hopefully it gives some schools some ideas.
Scary, but I think that's the way it works. I mean, we've talked to lots of schools who say, actually, we haven't done this for a while. We haven't really shifted our plans or our whole strategy, but parents are now asking. And 5 years ago when we were talking about we need to do things differently, it was kind of like, do we really, like, is the future of work really a thing? And there was a bit of like, we don't want to shake the cage. Like, parents pay us to make sure that we get good grades and they'll have a great university. So we don't want to question that. And from a marketing point of view, from a school point of view, that would be crazy. But now I think it's come around the other way, and they say we should be doing things differently. We should be providing more choice, more options, shaking up, opening their eyes to different pathways, not just about results. So I think it's good if parents are, that's where it's going to drive the change. And I think if, there's career practitioners passionate sitting in that other school, and suddenly someone's going to go, actually, we do need to do something. All those ideas you had, now we can do it. And I think that's the whole power that Sam McFetridge was saying last week. if you're in a fortunate position, if we can share that value and make it more visible, then it raises the bar for everybody. So it's a really good result, I think. So thank you.
I think there's a way that could actually be harnessed further, and it comes down to leadership of our discipline. And when you've got great practice examples, we've typically, what we've done is sort of have a little professional development event locally, and we share a case study, and everyone goes away either sort of seething with jealousy that they can't do that for whatever reason, dismiss it as not relevant in my school, or that might work in the city but it won't work in the bush, vice versa, blah blah blah. But if the leadership was to put out a document to parents saying, this is what you should expect from your career development practitioner in your school, it would suddenly put the wind up. But this highlights another problem, and I've seen this. I'm not going to name names, but I've seen a situation in this beautiful country of ours where certain agencies have put out curriculum materials, documents, and other agencies who are responsible for employing careers advisors in particular sectors have said, we decide what our careers advisors need to do, not somebody else. In the alternative, when there's been really good materials, I've seen people saying those are only for people in our sector. Those other people, those dirty, rotten Catholics, can go off and produce their own materials. They can't have ours, or vice versa.
Yeah,
So,
that came up a couple of weeks ago as a really big issue of what's holding us back around the competitive nature and the lack of collaboration and sharing. And we'll never move forward unless we just put it all out there.
And if I was a government minister, I would want to sit back and wait until New South Wales produces U-Butte materials, and I'll go and pinch them. It's a lot cheaper than having to do it myself. So you can understand the pressures and why these sorts of things will happen. So it's not, and also equally, it's all very well for some independent body or for me or for Bianca, whoever it wants to be, to sort of say, this is what you should be doing. But we're not the ones who are going to cop it. If it all goes horribly wrong, then it will be the Department of Education or the Catholic Education Office or what have you. So you can also understand their sort of possibly caution about taking in other stuff. There's a conservatism built into the system. But I do think that parents need educating about what it can look like and how good it can be. And that could be done in a systematic way. And it could be whatever, the Australian Youth
Foundation for Young Australians.
Yep, they could do it. The CDAA would be an obvious one. Seeker, more broadly, would be the obvious one to take the lead on this. But it does seem like there's a vacuum there, that the parents don't really know. And we always moan about the parents influencing kids in the wrong way and being 20 or 30 years out of date in their expectations. Well, what are we doing to make them informed consumers and demanding ones?
Yeah.
Because we know parent power is very powerful in school.
Yeah. Every parent engagement session we have, the parents are just so grateful for being educated enough to be valuable and informed in the conversation, because they're going through the same disruption and the same fear of like, oh God, what advice do I give my children? Like, and often the question is, what's the future? What should I be pushing them towards? Rather than actually, it doesn't matter. It's just teaching them how to think about it. Bianca, is that your dog? Am I? I think he's hungry. And then, so that's awesome. I think that's a really good learning. And I think parents definitely, that really exposes the parent power to that. The other one person I'd love to get back, if he's still here, is Matt, who shared a few weeks ago and promised that he'd come back and tell us how his little innovation in the student interviews would go. And so tell us what happened, Matt. Tell us about it, and how are you sharing it? How are you making it visible?
Yeah, no, it was great. So a bit of context with the current situation that was ongoing at the start of this term. With we set up at school, we called them quests, and so they had a KLA kind of underneath them, and they were split into big quests, which ran for a whole week, and it was a way for them to immerse themselves in some area of the school, and then smaller quests, which went for 5 to 6 hours, and they could fill their week, and they themselves chose where they wanted to go. And so I put together a week-long quest that involved an interview at some point within it, and the students could opt in to this. It was available for all students from years 7 to 10. And the idea behind it was that they had to immerse themselves. We challenged the idea of what's the future of work going to look like by reshaping their question to what do I want my future of work to look like, and getting them to think about, okay, well, what jobs are already existing? What skills do I need to be successful in those jobs? And then finding a gap within the current jobs that exist, and developing their own job that fits into that. and then create advertising for their job to try and get people to come and join their job. So this was underlined by in working in conjunction with the business studies teacher. This was looking into, because they had to create a business plan alongside it. And part of it, after the first 2 days, was they had to come to me with an analysis of their work, of the job that they have chosen that they wanted to research, and then have they needed to set out a pathway from that point then to get to for example, we had a girl interested in doing fashion design, and so she went out, she researched fashion design, and she had to create her own kind of plan using the skills that she had and the experience that she had in order to get to that point. And then we reflected on what kind of subjects she would need to do. She's in year 8. What kind of subjects she would need to do to get to the point where of the jobs that currently exist. And then the challenge was for her to try and think of a job that didn't yet exist. And so she created she put forward a pitch for a virtual reality fashion design program, where you take a picture, a 3D model, and you can actually design the clothes around that person, so they get an idea of what the clothes would actually look like being on. And then she had to figure out, okay, well, if I want to get there, what other pathways do I need to take in order to get there, and was able to feed that back. And so we had about 15 to 20 kids involved themselves in this quest, and so we had 15 to 20 new jobs that came through. And so one thing that I made sure to do was to celebrate those by letting the school community know of what kind of just what these students in year 7 and 8 were thinking about when it came to their own futures, and what kind of entrepreneurship skills they were developing. And the feedback that I've gotten has been outstanding so far. And I think this was something that I was tossing around, that if work experience wasn't going ahead, this was the model that I was going to use. And the feedback that I've had from both the teachers and from the students has been outstanding. And the parents have really loved it as well.
What visibility did the parents have, just from structure, just overhearing and seeing?
Yeah, overhearing. And we also, one thing I've really tried to do is bring in the P&C and the parent community as experts in various fields. Because being a new school, we've only been open now for 18 months. One thing we've tried to do in those 18 months is build strong community connections, but in some cases and industries, it's a bit slower to develop, especially with the current situation going on. So we called in parents to act as mentors to those students, if they were interested in the fashion industry, actually getting them in connection with certain parents who are able to then offer advice from that side of thing as well. And then showcasing the work. So either the business plan that they produced, one girl, Olivia 7 girl, created a disability support job, where they brought people with disabilities to come and mentor younger students with disabilities and help them through. And she was able to develop like this entire business plan around that side of things. And so we were able to showcase that to the parents and have really good parent buy-in to that as well.
Wow. And how are you like practically showcasing it?
So
public event at the moment.
Yeah, so we send out a kind of termly monthly newsletter, and so there's been a lot of that newsletter over the last kind of 3 months has been showcasing student work when it comes to futures education, and then part of that was looking at a flip grid as well. So allowing the students, and then the parents can just go in and scroll through this kind of smorgasbord of what the students are actually producing. And they've been able to jump in there and ask questions, and the kids have been able to be experts in their own field. Teaching the teachers, teaching the parents has been good. I just noticed it's Linfield Learning Village, so the new school that's on the old UTS Coringai site up in Linfield in Sydney.
Sorry, I forgot to mention that.
Yeah, sorry. You think I'd be good at selling the school by now, but
that's cool. And one other really practical question, and put any other questions in the chat, but one other really practical question, because a lot of schools I know struggle with this in terms of that parent connection. How are you actually capturing that and making it visible to the students? Are you doing the intermediary work, or have you got a database or a big word cloud? I know Maggie that was on has amazing kind of map of all the parent occupations that students can just
I've got a database that I've kind of created. So at the start of last year, when we were in the initial kind of 3 to 4 weeks, as we were getting all these new students in, we ran a bazaar style event where parents would come in and they'd be able to witness the work that their students had been doing. And I was heading up the wellbeing team, and so we were able to feedback where the students' wellbeing priorities lie. And then I also had a section for careers where it was simply gathering as much data as possible and expertise as possible, so that we were able to draw parents in into that.
Don't let them out until they've committed to helping someone. Almost.
That's it. Yeah.
Awesome.
And we've been really lucky in that the parents have been happy to jump in pretty much anywhere that we've asked them. We did run a project last year where the students created their own products. It was an entrepreneurship project where every student was in a group, and they ended up manufacturing something to sell at the twilight markets at the end of the year. So most schools would have twilight markets or some form of markets. This was completely run by the students, all the advertising, marketing, development. And so we brought parents in to act as experts. We had t-shirts being made, for example. One group they had to budget everything, so we brought in a fashion designer to help them with that. So there's been real transparency when it's come to bringing in the P&C. Cool. And they've been super keen to be active in helping us with that as well. That's
amazing. And I think that's a real strong way of getting that visibility and that connection without it being always pushing communications out, isn't it?
I think as well, one thing I committed myself to, probably to my own detriment in terms of my own health, but trying to be as visible as possible as a positive thing within the school, because so often and speaking as somebody who's come from a school where if you were sent to the careers advisor, it was often seen as a negative and the dead end for certain students, but rather being proactive and creating that positivity within the school means that whenever teachers or parents get phone calls or emails from me, there's that positive association there. But again, I understand, given that it's only been open for 18 months, and yeah.
But you're right. Even the fact that you've kind of gone to the business studies and gone, we're doing this together, and showing them the integration points is really powerful. What do you mentioned that you might do a blog post at some point? I'd just love to see some of the work. I'd love to see some of the experiments and the quests that they did.
I've been collaborating and collecting all this information that I kind of want to share with the world, and I will share with the world. I just need to learn to type, apparently, because given the current state of things, my typing and spelling has gone downhill very quickly. But no, I'll put something together. I've been really, really impressed by the quality of work the students are producing, and I really want to share that. I've just got to make sure that we're all above board with that. But once I do, I'll be happy to share it.
Now, there's something in terms of creating something quick between us all now. I would love for everyone, just some of the ideas we've got already just now around, school newsletters, going to the P&C, getting PR. I've actually just put a link up. Let me see if I can find it, of a little Padlet that we could actually just start populating of how we're making this visible. How are we making great work visible and valuable work more visible, as a way of sharing it with each other, and potentially, put things up that you wouldn't mind being shared externally. Because I think the more we can share about these great initiatives and ideas about, can we share impact data? Can we share public products? Can we share student work? Can we get press coverage? All of those ideas. So I'd love it if you take a few minutes, and it doesn't have to have images or anything, just a thought about how you could make something valuable that you do more visible. What could it be that you could contribute to this kind of collective? And maybe it's nothing at the moment. Maybe it's like, actually, I just want to listen for a while, but I'm sure everyone's got something valuable that they'd love people to know about, even if it was internally.
One of the things that Matt's inspiring work provoked in me, and also Bianca's, is there's this notion, you know, you find these people who are either very switched on, very motivated, very good at their jobs, doing really good stuff. You sometimes also find those in schools with catchments which have got a lot of kind of engaged parents who are prepared to come in and volunteer and so forth. From a system-wide point of view, one of the things I was thinking about is it's almost like reinventing the wheel and going right back to my old research colleague Robert Pryor's first job with the dreaded old vocational guidance bureau, and they would attach their caravan and go tootling off to Dubbo and then put everyone through the sheep dip of interest tests and values tests, and that would be the careers stuff they'd get. It was all centralised. There was a big vocational guidance bureau in number 1 Oxford Street. But the idea of kind of floating careers advisors who've got a portfolio across a range of schools in an area, working closely with the local careers advisor, I think, I know that sounds dangerously close to the LCP, local community partnership concept that was around about 10 years ago. But having a fully qualified team of people, because that liaison with industry is incredibly time consuming. There's equity issues that some schools are going to have really privileged access just because the Channel 9 newsreader sends his or her kids to that school or what have you. So there's an equity issue. And there's also, we've heard that coaching is really important, basically ongoing counselling and ongoing relationship and trust. These things take time. You can't be doing coaching and counselling while also spending half your time out there glad handing with the parent body or the local industry, setting up these sorts of things. It's way bigger than one person's job. So I'm wondering,
be much more efficient.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking that we need this, and equally, you could end up with a situation. I was thinking, do you actually want to have careers advisors employed by a school, or do you want to have the Careers Advisors Inc. company paid for by government or whoever, and people go in and they do a tour of duty and they move around. So their professional development is constant. They're getting experiences in different schools. They're there long enough for continuity, so they might 2 or 3 years in a school, move on, and cycle around, and then they go into a cycle of doing industry stuff. I'm making it up as I go along while you're hopefully putting stuff on the Padlet. And I think, again, like most of my things, it's 70% nonsense. So feel free to push back. I'm trying to provoke and explore ideas. But there has to be, we've got to start thinking about different ways of delivering this. And I think the DET model in New South Wales of having a full-time position in a school, while is admirable in so many ways, and they've been brilliant in supporting careers in a very expensive program, I think we've fallen into the trap of thinking that is the gold standard and that's the only way we can do this. And other states look on enviously at this facility and perhaps don't think about other solutions to this. And I don't think, I'm not looking at cut price solutions. What I'm saying is probably going to be a lot more sophisticated and a lot more expensive. But we've got to be unapologetic about what it is that we can offer and what it is that people need. And I'm not saying I've got all the solutions, far from it. I'm just trying to start that conversation. Yeah. But there's some of the ideas that was provoked in me from hearing Bianca and Matt's comments.
Yeah, I think that's true. We're the same as the sharing of resources and collaborating on that. We should spot the things that could do much more efficiently and take off people's plates. Can I ask someone who's been using Padlet a long time, how do I make them, the authors, not anonymous? Anyone? No?
I thought Padlet was something you got from the local Thai takeaway, but I have no idea. It's a small pad Thai, isn't it?
Well, I've got quite a lot of ideas in there already, so that's great. And feel free to come back in and expand those and add to them. It would be great to have that as an ongoing kind of resource with lots of ideas in. Before we finish up, I'm just going to share the link to the next session in 2 weeks' time. We're really hoping that we'll have the Senior Secondary Pathways Review data public by then. It's due at the end of June, and we're hoping we can get someone to come and discuss that, which would be, I think there'll be some quite big surprising things in it from what I've heard. Become best friends with the marketing team, enrollment management. Yeah, that's a really good idea. And for those of you who haven't been to one of these sessions before or recently, we kind of keep going for 10 minutes and everyone unmutes and has a chat. So if you're around, to stick around, join in the conversation. There is no discussion guide, it's just a chat, a bit more looser networking. So thank you for coming. I'm hoping that it wasn't too depressing about value and whether we've got any purpose in the world. But I think that's the beauty of this group, is that we can start to share the great work and make it more public. And that's what our plan is to try and do. So thanks for coming. Stick around if you've got time to. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Bianca. Thanks, Matt.